David Stark testified he was on an Army drill mission when he and 2 other men discovered Tanya Chanel's body. That was August 22nd, 8 days after her death. Stark described the scene as a remote area in Elmore County. He says the body was covered by moss, few branches, and several logs. Stark says he remained at the scene until sheriff's deputies arrived and photographs were taken. Those pictures were admitted as evidence despite the objections by defense attorney George Howard. Donnie Gardner sat motionlessly with his head down throughout today's testimony. His family and friends listened attentively. Garner is pleading innocent and innocent by reason of insanity. His lawyer admits Garner killed the girl, but says he panicked and lost control of himself after learning she was pregnant and she would not accept possible alternatives such as abortion or marriage. Also today, prosecuting attorneys questioned state toxicologist and pathologist Dr. Thomas Gilchrist, who says Ms. Chanel died from a blunt trauma to the head. Gilchrist says she received at least 2 blows with a heavy blunt instrument, causing fractures to her skull. He described the body as severely decomposed. Testimony continues tomorrow. Kim Davis, WSFA TV News in Elmore County.
And I'll say this, he has the interest of his people, interest of his district at heart. You know me and you know my reputation, and
areas of discipline and child abuse, neglect, and nutrition, health, things that would be of general concern to parents.
Remark.
My position is that I don't want to take credit for a report written by a jail consultant, Mr. Maxey. I want to see the credit given where it is due. Now, through the help of employees in the Montgomery County Sheriff's Office and jail, they gave Mr. Maxey detailed information which he asked for. And this report was compiled by Mr. Maxey, and I was given a copy, I believe, day before yesterday.
The plans by Sheraton officials came at a Chamber of Commerce meeting. Sheraton spokesman Jack Posey.
Well, we plan to incorporate the whole hotel into what we're going to call Riverfront Square as we see it now. There'll be a big theater-type complex, an audiovisual center, a mini mall, and some executive apartments or condominiums over there, as well as a 126-room expansion of the hotel with larger banquet facilities.
Posey says he expects construction to begin this spring or early summer. At this time, he says the cost of the project hasn't been determined, but says it would run into the millions of dollars. Sheraton officials have already spent $6.5 million on the hotel, which opened October 1st. The Sheraton is only a part of the lower commerce section of town that has been renovated. Altogether, more than $24 million have been spent on numerous other buildings that till only recently were dilapidated and abandoned. Now they're taking on new interiors and exteriors and are being used as office space. Union Station is also included in the renovation project. Work has already begun on the train shed, with work to begin on the station itself within a few months. Mayor Emery Farmer says the changes that have already taken place are an outstanding improvement to downtown, and he says he is very optimistic for future renovations to other existing buildings. Dan Black, WSFA TV News.
The January 1981 letter from the Department of Education required the state to draft a plan by the end of the year. In October, a committee of university representatives completed a plan that called for a multi-year effort to end the alleged segregation. But Governor James' legal advisor, Jimmy Samford, says the governor's revised plan calls for a shorter timetable.
He felt like, as the University Representative Committee did, that there's a need for some updating of data. However, he would like to see this data updated by as early as the end of March.
But other sources say the governor's revised plan has a proposal to create 3 regional boards that would have the power over program changes, program elimination, and possible campus mergers, all to be implemented within the next year or so. University presidents are scheduled to meet in Montgomery next week to discuss these changes. If they balk at the governor's plan and don't submit one to the Department of Education by the end of the year, the U.S. Justice Department is expected to step in an effort to force an end to this alleged segregation. Chris Grimshaw, WSFA TV News at the Capitol.
Board by changing the classification in every department and agency in the state of Alabama.
But you'll renovate?
No, these will be brand new industrial type. I hate to use that 400. Moving to a permanent facility will be somewhere around January 84th.
So how many prisons do you now have, state prisons do you have in county jails?
Do you,
A total of approximately 1,700?
no, it's 1,200.
Well,
Somewhere in there for 12.
now, does
The industry buildings in that facility will be constructed first, and we will house.
On the surface, it was just another meeting, a little longer and more crowded than usual. But beneath the council's action is a growing sentiment, a sense of a need to more clearly scrutinize all liquor license applications. The movement started in the last year, perhaps because of Councilman Mark Gilmore's campaign against several so-called joints in Montgomery. Perhaps because some council members think there's an increasing public concern about businesses selling alcohol in the city. Whatever the cause, the effects are almost surely to be seen more. One council member says it's going to be an uphill battle for businesses to get council approval for liquor licenses in the future. But even though last night's meeting made the direction the council is headed clearer, the meeting still left many questions unanswered. What rights do businesses have? What is a neighborhood, and to what extent should a neighborhood participate in council decisions? And perhaps most important, where will the council's new awareness of the public's sensitivity toward alcohol sales and uses lead? One thing's for sure, there will be more fireworks in the council chambers as future license applications come up for consideration. Tom Foreman, WSFA TV News.
The university representative's plan was drafted in response to a letter from the Federal Department of Education accusing the state of having vestiges of segregation in its system of higher education. The university plan called for some long-term efforts to be implemented one phase at a time over a 3 to 4 year period. But Governor James' legal advisor, Jimmy Samford, says the governor wants a plan that can begin to be implemented by March of next year. If the universities balk at the plan, postponing the submission of a plan to the Department of Education before the end of this year, the Justice Department will take over.
We don't see this as an obstacle that we cannot overcome if we have to deal with the Department of Justice. As you know, we have communicated with the Department of Justice on a pretty regular basis here in the last few months with other matters other than education, and we feel like that we can deal with the Department of Justice just like we deal with the Department of Education.
Sources say the governor's plan includes a proposal to create 3 regional boards that would control course offerings and possible campus mergers. University presidents are scheduled to meet in Montgomery next week to discuss the governor's revisions. Chris Grimshaw, WSFA TV News.
Like we said a while ago, I see no competition. What we would hope this would turn into is a permanent PGA type Pro-Am tournament with a true makeup of a golf tournament, as opposed to an exhibition and this type that we're having this time.
Can Montgomery support something like this?
I firmly believe it can. It won't only be in Montgomery. As you know, we've gone all over the state with asking the news people here. I would drive from here to Birmingham to watch Jerry Pate play golf. And in my opinion, most golfers that love golf, which to me is one of the best sports there is, would also do the same. I think they'll come from all over the state once it started.
Farmers have a difficult time financially whenever there's a situation of low prices, droughts, or government embargoes. Because of these natural and economic elements, some farmers find themselves in the same situation as the unemployed. They may not be able to make their loan payments on time. But State FHA Director Dale Ritchie says the number of FHA foreclosures hasn't increased.
We're utilizing every tool that we have within our portfolio to help people manage out of these difficult times. We intend to stay with our borrowers and to keep people in business. You see, the Farmers Home Administration ain't in the business of putting people out of business.
Ritchie says in the future he plans to increase the movement of FHA borrowers to private lending institutions and return to the agency's traditional role of financing the lower one-third of the FHA farm loan list. Cassandra Taylor, WSFA TV News.
And until that is resolved, we're operating on
Standard.
Farmer told the parents that even though he supports the president's budget proposals, he will support programs like Head Start. The mayor told the group that Head Start has the opportunity to solve a problem before it becomes a jail problem. Farmer says the Head Start program should not only stress love, but also discipline to the youngsters because, as he put it, chances are they're going to stay with what they've been taught. President of the Parents Association, Barbara Timmons, says the parents are expecting cuts in the program budgets, but have no idea at this time how much of a cut to expect or when.
And we hope that we can convince those lawmakers that we really need to keep that program alive. It's helping the children because I don't know of another program who does as much as Head Start. We take care of medical expenses, dental, complete dental care, educational activities. We have trained staff for everything.
The two-day workshop will conclude tomorrow. Mac Carmack, WSFA TV News.
At the home of Frances Harris, we found peeling paint, rotted lumber, and rags stuffed in holes on the side of the house. Mrs. Harris told me that she told Joe McGee, the contractor for this job, that the holes should be repaired.
Did you ask him to fix those holes?
Yes, sir. I told him, I asked him, would he fix those holes up there for me? And he said, yeah, he's going to fix them. And he ain't done nothing but just went on and hurried up and went down there to Rosa house.
The Harris screen door was causing problems. She said the slightest pressure caused it to tear.
Well, it just come loose itself. You just hit it and it come loose. It ain't nothing but just something. That's the truth. It just something. Go there and hit it. And I know I ain't got no children to tear out no stream door. Them stream doors come out themselves. Here. I wouldn't tell you a story. See here? I ain't joking. See there? I can't scrub. I can't take the brush and brush them down. You just tear them out. I just got to tack up there with that thread. You just come loose. Come on out that door.
Our investigation into material and construction at other homes done by McGee revealed other screens installed about a year ago that they were tearing or ripping, apparently for no reason at all. The Harris contract called for 2 coats of high-quality latex paint. That paint is already peeling.
Just 1 coat on it. That's all they got on it. 1 coat.
Do you know why this paint is peeling here? What?
It just was, I don't know, the rest of it ain't no good paint, I say. That's all I can say.
How many times did you see him applying paint to this?
No,
wood?
he didn't apply but 1 time. It one fella painted this house all the way around. I wouldn't tell the story.
The inspector who approved this work was Weston Scarsbrook. Scarsbrook certified that all required work was completed on September 8, 1980.
1 year later, the paint is peeling, The screen doors are failing and rats are invading the Harris home through holes left by the construction. The government paid McGee $7,400 for the rehab job here on the Harris home. This is Norman Lumpkin, WSFA TV News in Selma, Dallas County, Alabama.
Since 1979, $600,000 in federal funds have been spent on rehabilitation of homes here in Dallas County. Selma is one area where the money has been used to repair homes for people who otherwise would not be able to afford it. For homeowners to qualify for the project, county officials have to make sure that they meet standards set by the government. Next, the home is checked for areas needing repair. After that, the job is offered to a local contractor to bid on.
My investigation centers on how one contractor may have violated federal laws by using substandard materials.
And why county inspectors approved the work when it appeared that construction was inferior and materials used violated federal guidelines.
HUD guidelines require that high-quality lumber, paint, and other construction materials be used in the rehabilitation of homes funded by federal monies.
The rules are made known to officials involved in the project. The rules also forbid any variance from work orders approved by the local officials. In other words, homeowners are not allowed to get extra work or have any work done that is not outlined in the approved work order. But there are indications that some extra unauthorized work may have been done in the Selmont area. This is what we found at the home of 70-year-old Thomas Lee, paint that was peeling 17 months after the job was completed. Federal regulations call for 2 coats of high-quality paint. It appeared to one expert in building construction that only 1 coat of paint was used, and that apparently was not of the quality called for by the government. And there are other examples of poor workmanship. New doors were supposed to be installed at the Lee home. They were.
I told him something about the freezer in here. He didn't get his word before you come in.
The Lee work order also called for a removal of brick siding and installation of new siding. Lee says that was on the order, but it wasn't done.
He had been working with the man, the inspector, and he can make it with him. He just put this over the brick side and said it'd be much warmer in the winter and cooler in the summer.
Okay, now he said that the inspector in Hay was okay? You didn't have to worry about it?
That's what he said.
It is not clear why, but Thomas Lee's home was left with rotting boards on the back porch, and his doors have to be stuffed with rags after thousands of taxpayers' dollars were spent to help see to it that Lee lived in a decent place.
While checking into allegations here in Selmont in Dallas County, I discovered an attitude that has prevailed among contractors and some officials. And that attitude is this. They say, oh, the houses are only shacks anyway, and the money is federal, so why worry about quality work? They, meaning the homeowners, are getting free services anyway. And so it appears that the care that would have been taken with a privately funded job was ignored here because the money was federal tax dollars. This is Norman Lumpkin, WSFA TV News in Selmont, Dallas County, Alabama.
The computer has pulled out the names of those inmates within 6 months to a year of finishing up their prison sentences, and those files have been pulled. Now workers here at the Department of Corrections Records Office are going over those files, double-checking for any computer errors.
This is going to be done in 2 groups, one for 6 months, and then those inmates who will be eligible within a year. So we're trying to find out first through the 6 months group to make sure everything in their records is up to date and that they are in fact eligible.
And if they find something that doesn't quite gel, then they would not be eligible, is that right?
If you had something like that, of course you're going to have to say, quote, flag it.
But Tate says even if an inmate's file is flagged, his name will still appear on the list, and Judge Varner has total discretion over who is released. Some of those on the list can include murderers, rapists, or drug offenders. There was no criteria other than nearing the end of their sentence.
Judge Varner hasn't officially ordered the list, but the Department of Corrections has been instructed to compile one. The judge hasn't set a completion date for the list, and he hasn't said what he intends to do with it when he gets it. But if the past holds true, and if speculation is correct, we can expect another mass release of inmates by the end of the year. Gina Gregory, WSFA TV News at the Department of Corrections Records Office.
Alabama Power Company has
PSC President Billy Joe Capps says Alabama Power statements are an attempt to create a mirage to try to divert some attention from the facts in a rate case now before the Alabama Supreme Court. Capps says the PSC will issue a show cause order to require the power company to explain why it can't help recruit industry to the state. The PSC president pointed out that the power company has an industrial recruitment office that costs the consumers money. And as he put it, if they cannot support industrial development, they've got no business with that department. Capps says the power company's statements may harm the governor's industry hunting trip.
This company's action this week in those statements were an insult to the governor of this state and to the people of Alabama, and was directed not only to try to help their own cause before the court, but possibly would have subverted any positive results from the governor's industrial trip.
Capps says he hopes the show cause hearing can be held before Christmas. Matt Carmack, WSFA TV News.
As well. And if one
Trial Judge Walter Hayden explained the indictment charges against Garner and the punishment associated with those charges. The judge says the jury must be convinced beyond a reasonable doubt to render a final unanimous decision. The judge told jury members they can use Garner's confession, all the testimony and evidence presented in the case. That took about 35 minutes. During final arguments, defense attorney George Howard reiterated Garner's confession stipulated in the record that he killed Tanya Chanel. But Howard says the murder wasn't planned and there wasn't a murder during a robbery. Howard says Garner received no money for the car stereo or speakers allegedly taken and says the money was never found. Howard admitted the incident was tragic for both families. But prosecuting attorney Don Valeska used words like cold, calculating, and plotting to describe the murder. He took the aluminum baseball bat, the alleged murder weapon, and slammed it against the floor, each time saying, Tanya asked for love, mercy, and compassion. The echo seemed to send a chill through the courtroom. Mrs. Judy Chanel, who wasn't permitted to sit in through the testimony, did listen with tears in her eyes during the judge's instructions to the jury, and the reaction among local residents appears to be mixed in what many are calling the most talked-about trial ever in the history of Elmore County. Kim Davis, WSFA TV News in Elmore County.
Graddick told the Joint Fiscal Committee he took what he called the bad advice of some independent experts when he first recommended the power company be granted $230 million in higher rates. The PSC later denied the entire increase, and when the power company appealed, Graddick publicly supported the PSC's decision. The issue came up as Graddick was asking the committee for almost $4 million to run his office during the next fiscal year, an increase of more than $500,000. Health Department Director Dr. Ira Myers asked the committee for $22 million, $4 million more than his current budget. But Myers says he also expects to lose about $4 million in federal aid next year because of Reagan administration budget cuts. Earlier, Myers sat in the Sunset Committee as several people criticized the Health Department's governing board. For instance, Ted Gerber accused the Health Board of serious conflict of interest because its membership is made up of the membership of the Medical Association of Alabama. Gerber says it amounts to a health board more concerned with income than health care. Chuck Spradling was critical of the board's makeup, which he says should have more minority members. Chris Grimshaw, WSFA TV News at the Capitol.
When these jobs are completed, every customer has to sign a satisfactory page. All right. Now, sometime I would carry that out there. Sometime the inspector would carry it out there. That would be signed. That would be brought back to the HUD office. Okay. Then, in that day or the next day, they'd make out a check to me, which I'm the contractor, and the customer. Before I can cash that check, they have to sign it, and then I sign it. So there you have two satisfactory signatures that's been done.
Steve Bradley with Alabama Power says there's no representative from the power company on the trip because they would be unable to.
And of course, I don't know what would be behind a remark. Osaka, 6 million people, and it's 7 Japanese 16 governors in Japan, we were told this morning by Ambassador Mansfield within the last 6 months. Most of the southeastern states are very active. I think in the case of Georgia, as an example, Georgia governor has been here once or twice each year for the last 10 years. So it's a competitive situation. I'm at a loss to respond to that remark off the cuff because generally, and once they come there, then they will be shown the entire state of Alabama.
Given the history of the company from 1906 to 1981. In this advertisement of this publication, the company says, and I quote, "The company continues to seek new industry and is often the first to contact a prospective business when considering a move to Alabama." In other words, they're saying they're actively recruiting industry. If they've been saying this all year, said it during the rate case, why else would they up and say they could not support the governor's effort on his trip to Japan, except maybe they want to impact to the state Supreme Court and create some idea of a desperate situation. Actively distributing in this state, which they contend shows that the Alabama Public Service Commission
We have interviewed a number of companies in those respective fields, and I think that we will have, during 82, anywhere from 4 to 7 Japanese companies visit Alabama, companies that have made a decision, a definite decision to go and to put a plant in the States and have the available capital to do that. Radios, you name it, and then metal fabrication, both lighted. Well, Japan, as you know, is about the size of California and has 6 million people. And it's a very impressive trip because they would be unable to assure Japanese industrial prospects of adequate electrical power in the future. How do you feel about that, Paul?
From listening to Kim Braylock, the head of the American Federation of Government Employees, the other morning, he made the statement that the federal government, with their budget cuts and with other money-saving items, are laying people off in the federal government. So I don't see any benefit to giving us an opening to get employment in other federal sectors.
So one thing about this is was over 7,000 inmates. This could change. In other words, what was set last week might not be this week. You might have 550 last week who are eligible, but maybe say 515 this week.
Mm-hmm.
And next week it could change.
This whole process seems to be done in a different, well, the process is similar, but the way it was gone about.
The jury returned in an hour. Some observers say they were surprised at the time frame of the deliberation due to the complexity of the case, but say they weren't surprised at the jury's unanimous verdict. Before sentencing, Judge Hayden asked Garner if he had any comment or reason why he shouldn't be sentenced. Garner softly replied, no, and the judge issued the life sentence. Garner will be eligible for parole in 10 years. His family hasn't decided if they'll appeal. After the trial, prosecuting attorney said, "We presented the best case we had with the evidence we had." Garner's mother and father did not cry openly, at least not inside the courtroom. The only comments they gave were, "We love him very much, even though he made a mistake," and "Praise the Lord." Kim Davis, WSFA TV News in Elmore County.
We'd been gathering information and talking with people about the rehab program for about a month before I took a trip to Birmingham to talk to HUD officials about the inspection procedures and to try to find out why no one in the government had investigated allegations of shoddy work here in Selmont.
After my visit, HUD inspectors came to Dallas County. One of their first stops was at the home of Mrs. Isadona Haynes. Mrs. Haynes says her metal roof wasn't constructed properly and that she complained about that to contractor Joe McGee.
Oh, he told me that that's where the house was built.
Who told you that?
Mr. McGee.
The HUD inspectors found the same thing we found, peeling paint where there was supposed to be 2 coats of high-quality latex paint. The inspectors went through the Haynes house and interviewed Mrs. Haynes, but they would not discuss their findings with me. Mrs. Haynes did tell me that Joe McGee called her after he discovered that TV 12 News was checking homes in Selmont that he'd worked on. That is a violation of federal guidelines which say after the final inspection and the contractor is paid, the contractor is forbidden to go back to the homeowner for any reason unless authorized by the local government in charge of the project.
He asked me how was the work holding up on the house. And I told him what was lacking. And he said he would be out here in a few days. That he caught up with his work and he'd be out here. But he didn't say when.
Had you called him to ask him to come out?
No.
Do you have any idea why he called you just out of the blue?
Out of the blue.
The government paid $9,000 to McGee for the rehab job on the Haynes home. And Weston Scarsbrook inspected and gave final approval to the project, which authorized payment to McGee. After the HUD inspectors and TV 12's investigation of homes in the Selmont area, probate judge John Jones, who is the man responsible for proper application of the funds, sent his own men out to check into the allegations uncovered by TV 12 News. This is Norman Lumpkin, WSFA TV News, Selmont, Dallas County, Alabama. Dallas County Probate Judge John Jones is the county official charged with seeing to it that the federal funds used in the rehab project are used correctly. Jones met with HUD inspectors and they discussed their findings with him.
The HUD officials I met with pointed out several things that caused them concern. What I just discussed with you was one of them, that there should not have been this swapping out between the contractors and the homeowners. This was a very major point of concern because that tends to lead to other things.
Since that interview, Jones sent his own team of inspectors to some of the homes we looked at to see if their findings were the same as the HUD inspectors. Jones told me that if he finds that inspectors were negligent in their duties in Selmont, severe consequences will follow. So now there are 2 official investigations into the Selmont rehab project. Both started after we began ours and started asking these questions. Why would 2 coats of high-quality latex paint peel after a year or less? Why was untreated or the lowest grade lumber used in the project? And why were nylon screen doors used in the project and not doors with the metal mesh? And finally, why were the projects given the okay by County Building Inspector Weston Scarsbrook? The HUD findings are expected within the next few weeks, and the Dallas County Commission will see it. Judge Jones will see it, but say we can't see it. This despite the fact that TV 12 News first informed them of the allegations. This is Norman Lumpkin, WSFA TV News, Selmont, Dallas County, Alabama.
During the trial, there was never any evidence that Mrs. Phelps abused her son. Mrs. Phelps testified that the injuries to her son were explained away by her husband as accidental. Mrs. Phelps' attorney Bob Bino asked Judge Randall Thomas for probation in the case. Before sentencing Phelps, Judge Thomas said the blame for what happened rested with more than one person. Thomas also said following the trial, others had come forward to say they had knowledge of what was happening to her son, including friends, a state agency, and others. Then Thomas denied probation and sentenced Mrs. Phelps to 5 years in prison. Bino filed an oral notice of appeal and a motion for a new trial. Judge Thomas set the appeal bond at $5,000. Following the proceedings, Bino said he thought the sentence was excessive and that other people who were at fault in the case by failing to take action in behalf of the child were trying to relieve their guilt by placing the blame on Gail Phelps. Don Phelps, WSFA TV News.
Commissions in the other states, we've received responses from is that virtually all of the states that we
The jury began deliberating at 6:05. Their duty was to find Garner guilty of either first-degree robbery or murder during the commission of a robbery. Their decision had to be unanimous, and they had to be convinced beyond a reasonable doubt. At 7:05, the verdict was read, guilty of murder as charged in the indictment. Judge Walter Hayden asked Garner if he had any final comments or knew of any reason why he should not be sentenced. Garner replied softly, no, and the judge immediately issued the life sentence. Prosecuting attorneys say they presented the best case they had with the evidence they had. The state also tried to prove Garner committed the murder during a robbery. Had he been found guilty of that capital offense, Garner would have been sentenced either to death by electrocution or life in prison without parole. He'll now be eligible for parole in 10 years. Some observers say they were surprised the jury returned so quickly, but say they were not surprised with the verdict. Kim Davis, WSFA TV News in Elmore County.
Sutton says he hasn't had much time to review the governor's plan, but says from his preliminary observation he questions the governor's timetable.
Our first impression is that the time deadlines that are proposed in the governor's draft are very tight and would require an extraordinary effort on the part of everyone to meet. Whether or not these times can be examined in terms of the resources available to higher education in the state and the commission to meet them is one of the things that we are examining right now.
Sutton says the governor's 50-page plan is very complicated. He says the AIC staff will review the proposal according to the U.S. Department of Education guidelines, last summer's proposal from the Committee of University and College Presidents, as well as AIC's responsibility. Sutton says it'll take at least 2 days to complete that review. Cassandra Taylor, WSFA TV News.
If the subject feels it necessary to try to escape or try to run, the dog will either be released from the window or the back door will be open for the dog and he will be allowed to bite or to put a stop to the subject at that time, and he'll be held until the canine officer can get up there and release the dog off of him.
All criminals, particularly in organized crime cases, they want to know who the witnesses are, and they want to know where they live and where they're being kept so they can threaten them. And here we are being required to turn the list of all of our witnesses over to the criminal. In public corruption cases, that's what they want to know. And you see, the present law is we don't have to do that. We can protect our witnesses. We can tell the defendant who the witnesses are when the witness takes the stand. And that's the only really degree of protection that a witness has, is the right to remain anonymous until he's called to the stand to testify. And here we are telling a criminal, here's our case. Here the witnesses are going to testify against you, and here's what they're going to say.
About a couple of things.
Come on out. Gentlemen, ladies, we appreciate it. Good luck.
Have you in any case done poor jobs so you could take materials and do something else with it?
No, sir. Never. Never. As far as I know, we use the same type of material on these jobs that we'd do on your home, or either a $75,000 house. It makes no difference with us. And the inferior type of material, we don't go to a building material place and say we want inferior, cheap wood. We want something that will hold up and stand up to the type of work we're doing.
During sentencing, Judge Randall Thomas told Mrs. Phelps, although there was no evidence that she abused Jamie, it was her moral duty to remove the child from a dangerous environment. Judge Thomas also said that since her conviction last month, others had come forward to say they had knowledge of what was happening to the child, including friends and a state agency. District Attorney Jimmy Evans said Judge Thomas was apparently referring to the Department of Pensions and Security, which received a complaint from a daycare mother, but took the position that the complaint was withdrawn.
I don't see how in the world that complaint can be withdrawn at the whim of the person who's making it. I'm not saying it was withdrawn. I just say that in and of itself is a pretty miserable defense for failing to go to that home and take positive action for Jamie Weaver.
Phelps is now free on a $5,000 appeal bond. Her lawyer also filed a motion for a new trial in the case. Don Phelps, WSFA TV News.
The Commission's show-cause order was prompted by statements made earlier this week by the power company. Officials did not go with the governor to Japan because they would have to tell foreign businessmen that the future for electrical energy availability in Alabama isn't good. Company officials are also concerned about their present cash situation to pay for future generating facilities since the PSC turned down their $325 million rate hike request. But Commission President Billy Joe Kemp says that's not quite true, for one reason, because he says the company's recent generating capacity has been excessive.
Company's own witnesses, some of their own employees, testified in the recent rate case that the company in 1981 has in excess of 32% over its peak demand.
Commissioner Jim Folsom Jr. called the company's lack of support for state industry development a political tactic, referring to the company's rate appeal pending before the state Supreme Court. Folsom says past rate increases were granted for one reason, so the company could further industry recruitment. And Commissioner Lynn Greer had a suggestion for what to do with the utility's excess power, pursue new industry, and possibly lower rates to its customers. Kim Davis, WSFA TV News.
During the trial, there was never any evidence that Mrs. Phelps abused her son. Mrs. Phelps testified that the injuries to her son were explained away by her husband as accidental. Mrs. Phelps' attorney Bob Bino asked Judge Randall Thomas for probation in the case. Before sentencing Phelps, Judge Thomas said the blame for what happened rested with more than one person. Thomas also said following the trial, others had come forward to say they had knowledge of what was happening to her son, including friends, a state agency, and others. Then Thomas denied probation and sentenced Mrs. Phelps to 5 years in prison. Bino filed an oral notice of appeal and a motion for a new trial. Judge Thomas set the appeal bond at $5,000. Following the proceedings, Bino said he thought the sentence was excessive and that other people who were at fault in the case by failing to take action in behalf of the child were trying to relieve their guilt by placing the blame on Gail Phelps. Don Phelps, WSFA TV News.
Sullivan gives to number 22, George Peoples. Peoples picks up 3 yards.
There are many places within the plan where he proposes a role for the commission in conducting studies, in establishing policies, in serving as a leadership role in committees and in groups of presidents in the implementation of the plan.
Dallas County Probate Judge John Jones is the county official charged with seeing to it that the federal funds used in the rehab project are used correctly. Jones met with HUD inspectors and they discussed their findings with him.
The HUD officials I met with pointed out several things that caused them concern. What I just discussed with you was one of them, that there should not have been this swapping out between the contractors and the homeowners. This was a very major point of concern because that tends to lead to other things.
Since that interview, Jones sent his own team of inspectors to some of the homes we looked at to see if their findings were the same as the HUD inspectors. Jones told me that if he finds that inspectors were negligent in their duties in Selmont, severe consequences will follow. So now there are 2 official investigations into the Selmont rehab project. Both started after we began ours and started asking these questions. Why would 2 coats of high-quality latex paint peel after a year or less? Why was untreated or the lowest grade lumber used in the project? And why were nylon screen doors used in the project and not doors with the metal mesh? And finally, why were the projects given the okay by County Building Inspector Weston Scarsbrook? The HUD findings are expected within the next few weeks, and the Dallas County Commission will see it. Judge Jones will see it, but say we can't see it. This despite the fact that TV 12 News first informed them of the allegations. This is Norman Lumpkin, WSFA TV News, Selmont, Dallas County, Alabama.
All criminals, particularly in organized crime cases, they want to know who the witnesses are, and they want to know where they live and where they're being kept so they can threaten them. And here we are being required to turn the list of all of our witnesses over to the criminal. In public corruption cases, that's what they want to know. And you see, the present law is we don't have to do that. We can protect our witnesses. We can tell the defendant who the witnesses are when the witness takes the stand. And that's the only really degree of protection that a witness has, is the right to remain anonymous until he's called to the stand to testify. And here we are telling a criminal, here's our case. Here the witnesses are going to testify against you, and here's what they're going to say.
The Gail Phelps trial is considered by most a test case. It's probably the first time a person has been convicted of child abuse by failing to take action in behalf of the child. During the trial, the young mother was portrayed as a woman who was the victim of spouse abuse herself, a woman that was holding down 2 jobs to bring money into the family, a woman who was trying to make her second marriage work after a recent divorce. District Attorney Jimmy Evans says a conviction came about through a lot of hard work by the Montgomery Police Department and his office. Evans also said it was a very hard case to present to the jury.
You see, in this case, there was no allegation that Gail Phelps ever struck that child or mistreated that child or abused that child. The allegation was that she knew someone else was brutalizing the child and failed to take the child out of the environment. So it's very difficult to get a jury to convict where the defendant has not in any way laid a brutalizing hand on the child. We were concerned about the absence of that sort of evidence, but the evidence was so overwhelming and so strong that this lady knew that this child was being treated in this fashion and failed to do anything.
Law enforcement officials say there are many more people that are in the same or similar situation Gail Phelps found herself in. Evans hopes the conviction will be an example for parents that they not only have the moral duty to provide protective care for their children, but failure to do so is a crime. Don Phelps, WSFA TV News.
Michelle John Keith from Cherokee County. Okay, you snuck up all that. Benita Quinn, Macon County, Watauga County. Now, that's your group that'll do their talent on Friday. Brenda Lee from Calhoun County. Brenda, Montgomery County. Mildred Thomas Elmore. If I can find it here. No. Concert Grant, yeah, it's a big long. So we can send their companies home.
You're talking about Saturday the 16th.
All right, everybody that has an accompanist.
This is the 52-acre site on which the city of Wetumpka wants to locate its new garbage landfill. But if the residents of Cherokee Estates win their lawsuit, the city will have to look elsewhere. The dump site is close, very close to the homes of the residents. The closest is only 75 feet away. Attorney John Insland represents the residents.
None of the residents had any prior notice at all that the city was considering a dump in this site.
Becky Scarborough lives only 1,000 feet from the proposed site.
Seemed as though to us that they were trying to slip it by us without our ever knowing about it, and then it would be there and there would be nothing we could do about it.
Cecil Strength, a housing contractor, owns more than 100 home plots in the area and has spent $90,000 for a sewer system on property bordered by the planned dump site. What would this landfill do to the value of those homes?
Well, it's hard to say exactly, in a dollar amount what it would do, but in my opinion, without question, it would devalue them by at least 20%.
We contacted Wetumpka Mayor Truman Welch. However, Mayor Welch would not comment on the advice of his attorney. City Councilman Bob Whaley did speak with us, though, concerning the landfill. He says he understands how the residents feel and says he has been working on their behalf.
I've half supported their cause on the basis of trying to find an alternative to this problem, to find another site, if at all possible. If not, then to make sure that what's done there will be done properly, be supervised, be properly cleaned up on a daily basis.
Attorney Insland says the next legal step is up to the city to file an answer to their complaint. That's expected to come in January. From Elmore County, Dan Black, WSFA TV News.
Even before the governor left for Japan December 4th, there was criticism of the industry hunting trip. Some people saying with the hard economic times the nation is now in, outside interests are not needed. But others praised and are still praising James' efforts to bring more industry into the state. State Representative Larry Dixon of Montgomery is among those who sees both sides of the argument. He says it's easy to criticize the governor's trip. He says he's seen no real success in the governor's previous efforts to bring industry to the state. Still, he says, this trip could prove very worthwhile.
If we can bring one industry home through our governor's trips and give people who right now don't have a job or don't have a job that they're satisfied with, give them a high-paying permanent job, then I think the expense and all the hoopla would be worth it.
Earlier this week, reporters gathered in the governor's office for a long-distance update on the progress of his trip. At that time, the governor said as many as 7 Japanese industries have promised to visit the state next year as they seek a place to locate American-based plants. But even with these successes, many people remain skeptical of the need for the governor's trip. Dixon thinks the economy may prove damaging to the governor's efforts.
The economic situation that we're currently faced with does sort of put the odds against the governor's success at this time.
The governor still has many stops to make before he heads home, stops he'll use to try to pick up some industrial Christmas presents for the state and the nation's sagging economy. Tom Foreman, WSFA TV News.
That's the strangeness of this experience for me. I have a great personal feeling for the youngsters that I had participated in recruiting and coaching. We bled together and rejoiced together for a couple, 3 years in some cases, and I have that strong feeling toward them. That's going to be the strangeness, as well as their parents. And I have that strong feeling toward them. That's going to be the strangeness, as well as their parents.
Kyle Macy had the hot hand for Phoenix. His long-range jumpers got the Suns off and running in the first period. They led by 10 at the quarter. And when Truck Robinson put in a rebound basket midway through the second period, the Suns led by 16. However, the Blazers came back, and Jim Paxson hit a jumper from the corner to end the first half. Phoenix led by 3, 59-56. The Blazers pulled within 1 on several occasions in the third period. Mike Harper's stuff made it 77-76. But Macy kept the Suns in front, and Phoenix led by 6 heading to the final quarter. The Blazers fought back and tied it 90-all on a basket by Michael Thompson. The Blazers then took their first lead with 9 minutes to play when Calvin Nat fed Paxson inside, 96-94 Portland. With 6.5 minutes left, Thompson was triple-teamed, but he scored and the Blazers led by 5. The Suns came back to tie. A Macy jumper with 4 minutes remaining tied the score at 106. With 2:25 to play, Alvin Scott found himself all alone, and the Phoenix Suns went on top to stay, 109-108. Truck Robinson put a 15-footer off the glass to give the Suns a 3-point lead, and Phoenix made 6 foul shots in the final 2 minutes to put the game away. The final score, Phoenix 117, Portland 110.
This is the 52-acre site on which the city of Wetumpka wants to locate its new garbage landfill. But if the residents of Cherokee Estates win their lawsuit, the city will have to look elsewhere. The dump site is close, very close to the homes of the residents. The closest is only 75 feet away. Attorney John Insland represents the residents.
None of the residents had any prior notice at all that the city was considering a dump in this site.
We contacted Wetumpka Mayor Truman Welch. However, Mayor Welch would not comment on the advice of his attorney. City Councilman Bob Whaley did speak with us, though, concerning the landfill. He says he understands how the residents feel and says he has been working on their behalf.
I have supported their cause on the basis of trying to find an alternative to this problem, to find another site, if at all possible. If not, then to make sure that what's done there will be done properly, be supervised, be properly cleaned up on a daily basis.
Attorney Insland says the next legal step